All right, well, we have quorum, so I'm going to call the meeting to order. Welcome, everyone. The usual agenda items first, and then there's going to be a briefing and some delegations. First, we'll start with the approval of the agenda. So this is a special meeting with one agenda item, the Active Transportation Master Plan. So you see the agenda here, which contains recommendation and a report. I need a mover and a seconder for the agenda. Moved by Councillor Holland, seconded by Councillor Sanek. There is an addendum. It is a third delegation that you should have on your sheet. So the agenda would be with that addendum. Any discussion about the agenda? So we will be voting on the agenda as printed, plus a third delegation from Mr. Kane. All those in favor? Opposed, and that carries. And we have the confirmation of minutes from our last meeting. No. Right, we don't do that on a special meeting, so ignore that item. Any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, now we go to delegations. So there are three delegations. First one is Mr. Healy, chair of the Kingston Environmental Advisory Forum, and he is here to speak about the EITP. Reminder to all the delegates, you have 5 minutes.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. I'm going to try to whip through this. I thought I had 10 minutes, so you'll get a speed version of this. I'm here to represent KEEF, Kingston Environmental Advisory Forum, who reports to EITP. And I wanted you to know that there's one of the two main working groups within KEEF looking at active transportation. So I'm trying to give you the viewpoint from the discussions we've had there. First of all, as you probably know, and you've heard many times, but active transportation deals with many issues. The environment is the main one that KEEF could respond to, but there are, of course, many others, and we can talk about those later. So within the environment, we look at the Kingston Climate Action Plan, provincial policies, federal targets, and I think one thing that KEEF has a mandate for is to further education of the public, and we would certainly be hopeful to get involved in more of the education and encouragement parts of this transportation master plan. So just some meatball math, what I call, if you can't count the number of meatballs on your plate, you can't do this math, but otherwise I think most of us can. In general, we spend a third of our budget on transportation, both the constant capital and ongoing maintenance, transit budgets, all that kind of stuff. So it's a big part of our city budget. As an example, the 2015 KTMP talked about $750 million over this time period. We can come back to that. A household budget is also roughly a third, and I've given some examples, just again, meatball math, worked it out on the back of an envelope. About a third of what an average salary of $50K would spend is on transportation, if they drive a car. Kingston has made a lot of progress in all kinds of areas of transportation and active transportation. The success of transit is phenomenal. I can't say enough about that. You also know about the success of the school board city program, where there's free transit passes to school-age kids. The K&P Trail has been wonderful, and it's going to be a major contributor for a long time. There's a new bike share contract, so there's just generally much more awareness of the need for AT infrastructure. So let's talk about the walk and roll and what KEEF sort of reviewed and looked at it. The background was explained in your notes, so you'll know all this stuff, but so I'll have to skip through it, I'm afraid. But generally, it started 2 years ago, and my reaction is, thank goodness it's finally here. So It's been a long process, but it's been a very good one, I think. So the plan will be a blueprint for 20% of AT mode share by 2034. And I'll come back to why that's maybe a bit of an arcane thing for people to get their heads around. So when you combine it with transit, we're about a third of all the trips in the city will be by a sustainable mode, and that's quite a significant thing. So it may sound like not much, but just so you know, I think we recognize it's important, and it captures the need for the citywide network as well as a neighborhood focus. That's a very important thing that came out of the long deliberation we had over this report. I should add, if you don't know, I was on the technical advisory group, so I've been quite familiar with this report. It's designed for Kingston, and there's something for everyone. It integrates transit, so multimodal transportation is a very important part of all of this. And this notion of neighborhoods, 10-minute neighborhood is in planning terms what a lot of people are now starting to recognize as very important. So if you can receive or get to all of the things you need within a 10-minute active transportation walk or ride, cycle, to schools, work, groceries, all that kind of stuff, then that's a complete city. And then complete streets is a term for why we should what we should strive for in terms of a design of our streets, which is you have to remember, a big part of the public realm. It's just as important as parks and all of the other stuff that the city controls. So the streets are very important. So the committee, the Keefe Committee, certainly recognized all of this. This is the map. I don't know if it shows up. Oh yeah. The neighborhood map, I'm not going to dwell on that. You'll see it in the report, but it's an important idea to try to, first of all, I mentioned this 10-minute neighborhood thing. You know, all of those should apply there. But in addition to that, you know, if you're going to tackle something like this, you have to take it off in bite-sized pieces. So it's a good approach. The spine of the network, I don't have very good, but you see the point. We will, you know, the
1
plan.
minute.
Sorry, 1 minute? Okay. The plan identified the key areas that have to be connected. The transportation focus areas, all that stuff. So we continue with the pros. We don't have any cons. I wanted to spend, no, I'm just serious. There really isn't very much. I can talk about that in a minute if you have any questions about what I thought was missing. But, you know, we focus too much on this 20% mode share, and I think not everybody, the general public, will understand what that means. And so there's some progress to be made there. And we should maybe be measuring progress intermittently, and the last thing is my little pet peeve, that we de-emphasize the importance of, or the importance of bicycle theft as a deterrent to cycling and active transportation. But I just want to leave this up here. It's a great infographic that just shows that if we continue the first scenario, business as usual, if we continue with internal combustion engines and 2.1 billion cars, and the bottom line is how many megatons of carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases this will produce, business as usual is not really a good solution. There are really three revolutions happening in urban transportation. There's the two revolutions of electrification and automation, which may and should happen, and they're already happening, and they will happen before the end of this 20-year window for sure. And you'll see a very interesting thing. There are still 2.1 billion cars projected, and that's partly because we have this thing about car ownership, and that whole car ownership model creates lots of problems. There's a significant reduction in greenhouse gases, but you still have the problem of traffic congestion and a need for lots of roads. But if we make the step to the third revolution, which includes sharing in a very broad sense, and that's everything from Uber and Lyft to taxis to, but buses mainly, and all kinds of active transportation to complement all of that, we end up in a very, very enviable situation where we're down to a little over 500 million cars and producing a very, very small fraction of greenhouse gases. So I think it's very important to keep this picture in mind when we go forward. This is why we're doing this active transportation master plan, because we can't just get, even if we do get stuck on section 2, scenario 2, it would be much easier to go to scenario 3. And finally, in conclusion, the walk and roll plan is unanimously endorsed by Keith, and it's an excellent start to guiding Kingston through all those 3 revolutions in urban transportation. And my final word is, let's just get on with it. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Healy. So at this point, questions from members of the committee are in order. You get 2 questions per member of the committee, and no other questions are allowed, and your questions must be directed at the delegate, not at staff. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you for the presentation. So I'm curious, you talked about, this is maybe 2 questions in one, but I only have one, so I'll put it this way. You talked about the difficulty with mode share in explaining that, or sort of getting the general public to take that on as an initiative. And so the question I have is related to the context of getting kids to school. We have recently been involved in discussions about walking school bus, that type of thing. So just looking at that population as an example, the 2 questions that are related to that are explaining the situation to parents who think they're doing a good thing by driving their kids safely to school every day when they could be taking the bus or walking and biking. So how do we explain this appropriately in your mind, the sort of the need from the city's perspective, but also dealing with some of the issues related to why biking isn't happening? So for example, bike theft, as you mentioned, perhaps bike helmets. Do you have any sort of useful suggestions for that population?
Okay, retain all that, but you know, you're right, you're bang on. The problem with school age travel, partly ameliorated by this transit pass thing, which is, as I mentioned, a great thing, but there's still, you know, so many parents who think that they're doing their kid a favor by driving them to school, and that's nothing could be further from the truth. Just let them get to school on their own, and using active modes, they're fine. But in terms of trying to do that, I know KCAT has been involved in it a little bit. There is, KFL&A has a school travel public health nurse who's working on it exclusively. So building on the success with transit passes might be a bridge. And I think one of the interesting phenomena is that school-age children are the best ones to come and bring the message to their parents. They, you know, this is why I want to walk to school, Mommy. I don't want to, you know, I don't need a ride. And once that conversation starts, that'll help a lot. So if you can somehow aim things that way, I think the school boards have found that that's the best way. I sit on a committee, the environmental strategies committee for the school board, and they have some major issues for sure about that, and they're kind of stuck on how to get forward. But Jeremy DaCosta has tried it and been somewhat successful, but you really have to stay on it. It has to be several iterations through school kids, and then it might catch on. And as far as other barriers like bicycle theft, I mentioned, inadequate supply of secure bicycle parking, which is kind of related to that, and I think the city is making some progress on that. Those are things that have a real deterrent, you know, and I hear heartbreaking stories of, you know, little kids who save up their paper money and their allowances for a couple of years, and they buy a bike and it's stolen like within 2 days, and they're just, you know, that's really a serious issue. And I know that I think the city police could work towards a bike bait program. I know it's been successful in other jurisdictions, so I'd just like to see more done.
Thank you. Any other members of the committee have questions for the delegate? I have a question about the comment at the end about the 20% mode share target 2034 and how it's arcane. And I guess I'll just preface my question by saying there are other places in North America that have a much higher than 1/3 mode share of active and sustainable modes, so transit and active together. And they didn't get there overnight, of course. But it seems like in these, there's like a tipping point where all of a sudden people start rushing towards the other modes.
Yeah.
So do you feel like that's the case for Kingston?
Yeah, I think it's possible to get to a tipping point, and it. I mean, what we're looking at, our current mode shares, the last sort of, I don't know if the numbers are pretty rough, but it's only like 2% cycling, 1 to 2% cycling. And there's something like 11% walking within the core of downtown, and I don't know how that translates as a mode share across the city. Transit, of course, has had some great successes, and so I think the transit experience is probably a good illustration of a lot of people deciding, hey, I'm going to give this bus a try because their colleagues are using it, and you know, so that's this kind of social facilitation thing that goes on. You know, if you see one person having a great time, you want to join in, and so that is happening, and it's certainly a well-known phenomenon with cycling. That, you know, once you get beyond a certain threshold, two things happen. You know, you get a big surge in mode share, but you also get a surge in safety. There's safety in numbers, and once motorists are aware of cyclists more and they see more of them, it has a nice sort of synergistic effect. So yeah, I think it's possible. We're not there yet, and I think, you know, from the time I've been involved with it, you know, say 2008, it's almost 10 years I've been involved in trying to encourage active transportation. You know, I've just known sort of, or I've seen anecdotally more and more people on bicycles and walking, but I just don't think we're quite at the mode share level. Now, as far as mode share being arcane, you know, probably everyone in this room understands it, but I'm just a little worried that the general public may have a hard time understanding what that concept means, and that's all. And so maybe there are other ways to measure achieving the success. So getting a gold level bicycle friendly community designation, that's something I think most people will understand. So, you know, setting that out as a target isn't such a bad thing in that case.
Okay, so you sort of partially answered my second question. So you're saying the gold standard for cycling community might be one of those points that gets us maybe to a tipping point. But if you had to put a number on it, like just, I know it's arcane, but if we're at 2% now for cycling, what number do we need to be at where we start getting those safety benefits and that sort of mob mentality benefit?
Well, I don't know if the number, I think 10% is sort of a magic number, and that, but I don't know how accurately that's been determined. I know in Vancouver, they've probably reached that, and so remember, it's 10%, well, 20% combined cycling and walking, so 10% seems to be a number I've heard, but I don't know the research behind that. But it would be a good one to test.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for your time. So we'll move on to the next delegation, which is Mr. Bursey, who, of course, is speaking to the same subject. And you also have 5 minutes, Mr. Bursey, and I will give you a 1-minute warning when you get to 4 minutes. I won't start the clock until you're ready to go.
But you would have saved me.
I would try to save you.
Hi, I'm Bruce Bursey, and I'm going to read, I don't have a slide thing, but I have prepared some comments. And I'm Bruce Bursey. I live in Calvin Park, and I'm a member of the Kingston Coalition of Active Transportation, and I am the acting chair of the Pedestrian and Transit Committee. I've also had the privilege to be a member of the Active Transportation Management Plan Technical Advisory Group, or TAG, as you've probably heard. I'm here today to speak on behalf of KCAT in support of the proposed Walk and Roll Kingston, Kingston's first comprehensive active transportation master plan. The aim of the plan, as we've just discussed, is to achieve a 20% active transportation mode share target by 2034. Since the fall of 2016, representatives of KCAT have attended 4 TAG meetings. In addition to these meetings, we participated in workshops, attended public meetings, reviewed maps and reports, took part in bicycle and pedestrian group tours and evaluations in different parts of the city. This helped us better understand the challenges and opportunities for improvement in AT infrastructure, policies, and practices, including the integration with transit. The outcome of this work is a strategic ATMP that offers an excellent, in our mind, an excellent first step towards the vision of a citywide network, a network based around a spine of dedicated AT infrastructure that connects neighborhoods. Key to the implementation over the ATMP, over the coming years, is the framework in the plan that provides a means to reflect neighborhood realities in the design and operation of the local networks, connecting to the spine and across the city. The inclusion of concepts like complete streets and a framework based on the principles of the 5 E's, engineering, education, encouragement, enforcement, and evaluation, gives us confidence that this proposed plan lays a solid foundation for future councils to use as a guide, to implement with ongoing public engagement. Critical to the success will be the engagement and active participation in neighborhoods across the city. Not only will this help to better understand the challenges faced in each neighborhood, and the connections with other neighborhoods and other parts of the city, it will also help to foster a sense of ownership and use of the infrastructure into the future. The benefits that Kingston will accrue with the adoption and implementation of this plan will reach years and generations into the future. Promoting active travel and public transport has health, environmental, and economic benefits, and reduce air and noise pollution. As the ATMP is implemented, we can also expect to see a decrease in pedestrian and cyclist injury rates. In this regard, we're also encouraged that this work will benefit from the findings and the recommendations of the Vision Zero Kingston's Road Safety Plan, which is currently underway. From this work, we've learned that roads that are safe for pedestrians and cyclists are safer for everyone. In closing, I'd like to remind the committee members that in recent years, Kingston has received bronze designations under the Bicycle Friendly Community and Walk Friendly Ontario Awards, acknowledging the important active transportation work that has already been accomplished in Kingston. It was mentioned in a recent evaluation that a way to improve our status would be to adopt and implement an ATMP. The passing of this plan by Council this year will be a clear signal of Kingston's commitment to active transportation, and it will help move us to silver and on to gold, and achieve the target of 20% active transportation mode by 2034. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bursey. Questions from members of the committee? I saw a hand almost go up. Right, well, seeing none, thank you very much. So there's one more delegation. Mr. Kane will come and speak to the same item. Again, you will have 5 minutes to present and whatever time it takes to answer questions.
It's your warning. No, it's the road trip. That was our sign.
Supposed to put tape. It's the engineers. You can come up with something besides an omelet. So, okay, thank you very much. And just wanted to, thanks for the opportunity to address the issue to this committee. Also want to just kind of thank Mark and the rest of the engineers and the city staff that's been involved with developing this active transportation plan proposal, as well as the consultants who have guided us through the process over these couple of years. I've worked with many regional and local governments over the past 25 years, particularly on cycling issues. I was on the first KCAT committee here in Kingston, and I'm also a TAG member, so there's 3 of us on the TAG member. So we all 3 that spoke in this delegation have known this project. One of the things I really think that's important to keep in mind is that we need to keep this momentum moving forward. There's been a lot of work. It's been over 2 years that we've been in the process, and I think about 2 years, somewhere along in there. But, and it's not been a project that's been taken lightly. There's been lots of good work, so I think it's important that all this good work, we keep the momentum, and I hope the committee recognizes, which I'm sure you do, the effort that's been put in on this. The plan is advantageous to the city for all people who may use active transportation, whether it's walking, cycling, bus, transit modes, this type of thing. As a cyclist, it is very beneficial, the plan as proposed, to not only the citizens of Kingston that do cycling on a daily basis for their commutes or what have you, or recreation, but also as a tourist type of advantage to the city. As a cycle tourist, I've cycled lots of places all over the world, lots of cities. It's always great when I come into a city that I kind of know, hey, the city has it. The city really takes cycling as a serious mode of transportation. And that would be evident in this plan. Realizing that all plans are not perfect, including this one. There's no such thing as a perfect plan. I'm convinced of that. But I think I know that these kind of things that we were talking about developed, have to trust that after it's approved, the exercise in critical thinking will continue. And so in this plan, as being a long-term plan, that as it's implemented, that process of critical thinking about doing evidence-based decision-making is really, I think, will continue and is outlined in the program or in the plan as presented. Much of the proposed active master transportation plan deals with infrastructure, and that is great, and infrastructure is done well is really important. It really does help. While infrastructure is that key component and a concrete, all puns intended, result of a master transportation plan, let's don't lose sight of the importance of education and awareness. So as we talk about in the plan and as it developed, there is a piece in there that has the education, and we're not talking about just advertising, hey, we've got this going, but it's more of a looking at how do we train, how do we really have the citizens know what the benefits are to have that mode share change. Infrastructure alone is not going to change the behavior. It takes that combination. As an example of that, one of the cities, and this is cited quite often, Madison invested Madison, Wisconsin, millions of dollars several years ago, only increased 6 to 8%. One of the reasons cited for that is because they did not have a great education component to those initiatives that went along with that. So I think, again, I'm very pleased and excited that this has gotten this far, and I want to, again, thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. I really, truly hope that you move to recommend this to full council for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Go ahead, Councillor Holland.
Thank you. So seeing as you, there are parts of the world, country, I assume, I'm curious about your perspective on some of the cycling safety initiatives proposed here, and are they, if you're a comfortable cyclist, is that something, is what we're proposing sort of adequate? Do you feel that there are some areas that need a little bit more attention, or what's your preference in that way?
It's a great, well, one of the things I think, and it's been recognized, that the perception of safety is so important on getting people out and riding bicycles. So there is, as was mentioned earlier, there's a critical mass number type wise, so we get that. Safety is really a two-part thing. It's a personal competence and confidence in the skill of the rider, as well as an environment where they feel like they can initiate that and practice safe cycling. So it's a tough question to answer because not all cyclists are going to be, as equally benefit, if you will, from the cycling infrastructure as other cyclists. Personally, I will cycle anywhere, any place. It's not because I'm super brave or super courage or super cyclist. It's because I know the skill and confidence. I kind of grew up in that environment. We're talking about different generations. Not so much. We talked about the bubble wrap and the parents drop, this type of thing. So a part of that is confidence and skill. Having said that, also, I've been on some very busy roads here in Kingston. It's going, I'm going to try to get off this road as quickly as I possibly can. I'm not scared that I'm going to, be crashed, but it's just, not that comfortable. So I understand it from both of those angles. So to answer your question more specifically, I think that what's in this plan, with the careful consideration, and again, that evidence-based and looking at it from a neighborhood and a corridor perspective, bringing it together, will accommodate, all kinds of cyclists and help promote cycling.
Any other questions from members of the committee? Okay, thank you very much. So we've got another presenter. This time it's a briefing. He had a big part in the development of this plan. He also, Mr. Semple also worked on the transit plan. And the parking specifically, the parking implementation. So there's a briefing. So I'm told that the briefing is 22 minutes long. Is that correct?
I think there was a commitment to somewhere in the neighborhood of 22 minutes.
Oh, I thought I'd mention that before we get started, so people aren't wondering why it's 22 minutes. This hour is 22 minutes.
I'll do my best to sort of bring it in under that. Thank you, Councillor Stroud. Here tonight to provide a briefing on the active transportation master plan draft that's been brought before the committee. The agenda for the briefing that I'll provide will talk about what is in that draft plan and how it was developed, the recommendations that are contained within it, and then what the next steps are. We have our team of staff and consultants with us as well. Mark Dixon with the city's transportation department, Sue Cumming of Cumming and Company, who looked after our engagement pieces, and then Christina Valente and Dave McLaughlin from WSP. That are here tonight will be available to answer any of the questions and participate in the discussion afterwards if there's pieces that come up from that. So when we think about the active transportation master plan for Kingston, there have been components of an active transportation policy that have been completed in the past. The cycling and pathway study, it's discussed as part of our transportation master plan. But this is the first time that the city is putting together a comprehensive plan that speaks to the options that we're looking at doing at putting in place to improve the accessibility to active transportation and putting in the programs and initiatives that would then support the development of that to meet the city's goals. So this started with council's direction at the end of 2015 to put the 20% AT mode share goal in by 2034, and to bring a plan that would speak to the policies and programs and infrastructure that would help us achieve that. So this draft plan that we've brought to you, the master plan, is an aspirational plan, but it's also attainable, and it builds upon the city's policies and initiatives that are in place or underway, and speaks to the need to create a comprehensive citywide network, to consider the ways that active transportation would be incorporated at the neighborhood level, and then also outlines a series of policies and programs and initiatives that would go along with that infrastructure to support people being able to make those active travel choices. So it was alluded to a little bit tonight as some of those components that made up the development of the plan, but it was a community-driven process with members of the public and stakeholders participating through a variety of events, but was also shaped by an advisory group, some members who spoke earlier this evening. And it was an iterative process that was completed in 5 phases. So it started in September of 2016. And it really focused around, developing a vision, looking at the principles, and setting some goals for what would make up Kingston's plan, and then moving through an iterative process on developing the network and then the programs and policies that would be considered. So some of those pieces that form part of the public engagement were pop-up workshops, community forums, open houses and workshops, but also moving out onto the street and completing some walking tours and cycling tours around the community to inform the study team, but also to gather input about those pieces that need to be a part of the plan. So when talking with the community, we asked them sort of 2 broad questions, I think, in forming those, the vision and the goals of the plan is, why is active transportation important for Kingston? And we hear things along, it will help the city be a safer city. It will increase connectivity and accessibility for everyone in the community. It'll create a more equitable and inclusive transportation network that everyone can use. And then in speaking to our community about how would you then get Kingston on the move, we heard a lot about needing to create connectivity in the citywide network. How people need to feel safe in using that network, especially around areas where there's crossings or intersections, prioritizing the way that pedestrian mobility would be considered, and components around the way we design and redevelop our neighborhoods, how we promote and educate people on the programs and the pieces that exist for them to use. So within that and through that process, we developed a vision for Kingston's ATMP, which is shown up there. But it really speaks to moving the bar and setting a goal so that more than 20% of all of travel that's occurring is occurring in an active way. And it's built around 6 key principles: safety, connectivity, equity, equality, accessibility, and promotion. And so those principles form part of the analysis of the components that are placed within the plan. And we developed that from 4 goals. Specifically looking at providing a safe system where all users of the system can equally participate: pedestrians, cyclists, transit users. Developing a connected transportation network, integrating active transportation with our transit, with Kingston Transit, and the great success that we've had across the city with those components. And then developing a community and a mindset within the community that supports all of the ways that active transportation can be brought forward. So within the plan that's been presented tonight, you'll see a comprehensive active transportation network for all users. You'll see a city spine that is built along those corridors to encourage walking and cycling. You'll see a network that is linked in with active transportations and connections to Kingston Transit. Facilities that support the way you would use this from a recreation and from a tourism standpoint, and then that all supported with programs to help us move towards that goal. So to that end, within the plan, it's broken down into two main sections. You'll see a section that references the active transportation network, and then you'll see a section that references the active transportation action plan. So I'd like to take a few minutes and go through each of those sections to give you an idea of what's contained in there and how they work together. So the active transportation network, and this was spoken to by a few of the speakers tonight previous to me, is it was very important that we create a connected network across the city. But there was also a lot of discussion about how you would create both a citywide network, but also take into account what would happen at the neighborhood level. And so our approach on that is to present a network there's a hierarchy within that network that's basically centered around routes that are connecting across the city, a citywide backbone or a citywide spine. And these would be routes that are built on our arterials or our major pathways and provide those sort of major east-west and north-south connections, coupled with a number of routes that would be built at a neighborhood level. So how are you connecting to the schools and the community centers and your local corner store so that there's opportunities that exist at a neighborhood level for you to make those trips without a car. And it really speaks to that sense of, in the same way that people use their car for long trips and short trips, that option should exist also from an active transportation standpoint. So you'll see that presented as a citywide spine and a neighborhood level network. So an example of that being, when we're talking about a typical sort of citywide route example, this is a section of Princess Street. It's an area where there may be a high volume of users, both in vehicles and pedestrians and cyclists, but also competing for sort of a limited space. There may be commercial areas and there may be a high demand for on-street parking. Versus an example shown on Macdonell Street, where it's a residential area, there would be a lower vehicle volume, there may be traffic calming measures and changes with the way that we look at parking regulations to encourage that type of travel. So within the plan then, you'll see two maps, map 2A and 2B, that speak to this hierarchy. So you'll see and on those maps, so one is a citywide and then the other is referencing the urban area, you will see a series of blue routes. And those blue routes are what is proposed as the citywide network. And you'll also see some red routes, and those red routes are the neighborhood level routes that have been defined. The key differentiation on this map is that those citywide pieces, those citywide routes, we're defining sort of where they are, where we want to build those out over the long term, and fixing those in that capacity. The neighborhood routes, those red routes that are shown, are routes that we heard about from consultation, but also part of our analysis of how those neighborhood pieces could connect together. But they're meant to be more dynamic. Those will be defined and become sort of more ingrained as part of a separate process that I'll talk to you about. The other component that you'll see on these maps, you'll see a series of dotted black lines, and these are desire lines. You may be familiar with that term from the Waterfront Master Plan. Those connections represent, so we heard from a lot of people and through our analysis about there are some pieces that we need to build and make a connection with, but they may be on areas that the city doesn't necessarily own or control access on. But it's important to identify those areas so that when an opportunity presents itself, we can work to complete that network, and that there's a vision and a plan in place for how we would do that. So I just want to explain sort of that hierarchy and what you would see on those maps. The next set of maps included with your plan are maps 3A, B, and C. And these maps are a more detailed look at those citywide routes that are being proposed, both from a walking and a pedestrian standpoint. And these maps take the analysis a little bit further in that we say, here's where the routes are, and here is the type of infrastructure that we're proposing to build on those routes. So it's referred to as a facility type. And the analysis was done from the standpoint of, what type of road or pathway is this? What is the available right-of-way, or what right-of-way could be made available? Are there any safety concerns? What did we hear from an engagement and a consultation standpoint? And how can we put together that network and the facility that we would build on that network so that we have an understanding of what we are building, the types of infrastructure that would be available, and the costs and complexity associated with that. So this is designed, this is designed to be a recommendation on what we would build along those citywide pieces, but we also recognize that a lot of that would also be determined at a detailed design stage, but it certainly provides a framework and a direction for where we would proceed from. So those facility types are probably, if I could take just a few minutes to sort of speak to what you would then sort of see and what those actually look like to line up with the colors that are shown on those maps. So when referencing some of the types that we would build from a cycling standpoint, we're looking at a range of typical sort of shared space on a street or within the right-of-way, a shared space with some sharrows, so markings available on the roadway or the asphalt, and a bike lane, so a painted line and some signage. All three of these are currently in use within the city. You've seen them on some of our roadways. To some higher order types of facilities. So a buffered bike lane, so we're providing a painted buffer with some bollards or other pieces that create a measure of separation between the cyclist and the vehicles on road. A cycle track, which is a raised, separated facility that's on road, but creates more of a physical separation. And then an in-boulevard trail, so a physical separation from the road that can be a mix of cyclists and pedestrians. In the more rural areas of the city, we may be looking at paved shoulders or buffered paved shoulders to allow cyclists a space within those roadways. And from a pedestrian standpoint, we would consider types that are related to sidewalks, off-road trails, and then in-boulevard trails that we've discussed. So those facility types and those components are reflected on those maps to sort of speak to the citywide network. The other component of it that I talked about was then what do we do at a neighborhood level? And we heard a lot of comments as part of the consultation and certainly in the discussion with our advisory group of, so much of what needs to happen at a neighborhood level, and how can we include at a master plan all of the details of what needs to be developed at the neighborhood. And so from that standpoint, all of those, it would be very difficult to include all of those pieces of what needs to be addressed at a neighborhood level within a master plan. But the EITP speaks to a process that we could use to then address that. And we're talking about, in the plan, it's framed as a transportation focus area. And it's really about breaking down the parts of the city into some more manageable pieces so that we can address some of those local and neighborhood level concerns and understand sort of what pieces would be most appropriate in these areas. So the plan includes some preliminary boundaries in order to sort of create those partitions or to create those transportation focus areas. And these areas have been developed based on natural boundaries such as rivers and lakes and wetlands, policy boundaries like the urban growth boundary, hard transportation boundaries like the rail lines or highways or major roadways, and considering all those pieces in sort of an area that would make sense from a more local standpoint. And so part of that transportation focus area approach would be this is where we would understand, what is the preferred cycling and walking routes within a neighborhood or within a community. What measure of traffic calming or on-street parking regulations need to be put in place to encourage those pieces. What crossing and intersection improvements are required so that everyone feels comfortable moving in an active way within their community, but then also what programs and partnerships or initiatives need to be put in place so that you can encourage that. Because I think there's a recognition that there are certain areas of the city where one program may be warranted and would work very well, but it may not work well in another. And so how do we tailor some of those pieces to address some of the neighborhood level concerns that we're hearing? And the third component of the AT network that we're building, it speaks to those places where AT users generally feel most vulnerable. And that's at places where they're crossing or intersections where various modes such as cars and pedestrians and transit and cycling may be mixing. And so there are the routes that and the facilities that you're seeing recommended at the citywide level. We don't have a detailed design for which each of those intersections would look like. But there are provincial requirements and guidelines that we can work from. And during the detailed design phase, the intention would be that it's not just that the route is going in, but that we are looking at the configuration and makeup of those intersections and crossings so that it is supportive of the facility type that we are putting in. And that we would consider that at the neighborhood level as well as part of the transportation focus area work. The plan also, so in saying all of that, sort of talking about the existing intersections and the crossings and how they would be improved and what we would need to consider, the plan also includes 8 locations that are shown on maps 3A, B, and C, where major barriers to active transportation were identified. And so these are typically, would see a number of mid-block crossings, but also crossings over railways and linkages that need to exist within some of our off-road trails. They've been included as projects that need further study that we need to determine the feasibility for and then develop a more detailed design and costing from, but certainly represent major barriers to active transportation connectivity that would need to be addressed in the longer term. So that entirety of that network from a citywide standpoint with the facilities that we're recommending, those components that support that AT infrastructure and the studies that need to be completed on that, along with some funding that would be allocated to the transportation focus areas, creates an estimate within 2018 dollars of an investment of approximately $127.5 million. So that speaks to the investment that the city would make in that from an infrastructure standpoint, from a capital standpoint, in order to build out these components over the long term. So while you're mulling over the network and the funding of that network, the other component of this is the Active Transportation Action Plan. And so this is a recognition within the plan that the physical network that we're creating is only one component of what needs to be in place. There needs to be programs and communication and education that encourage active transportation, coupled with an operation and maintenance of the overall system. So the ATMP includes sort of all of these components as part of the AT Action Plan, which it gives a framework for staff and for decision makers and for community stakeholders to develop some more concrete actions from. It's been based on 4 objectives: communicating information so that we can influence behavior, providing supportive infrastructure and the services that allow you to use that infrastructure, considering how active transportation would be included in new development and redevelopment areas, and how we would then enforce the way in which that network and all of those components are used. So this table shows that sort of breakdown between some of the programs and initiatives and broad categories that would be included, as well as from the standpoint of an operations and a maintenance. So certainly from a program and initiative standpoint, recognizing the partnerships that we can make within the community, and the education and awareness that we can build, some of which Mr. Kane spoke to and was underway last week as part of Cycle Week. We're fortunate to have 2 students working with us this summer, Anna and Mac, who were the winners of the Mayor's Innovation Challenge. And so Anna and Mac's work with active transportation includes some infrastructure pieces this summer around bicycle parking and other pieces. but also includes an outreach component. So they're meeting with schools, they're running activities, and they're partnering with some of our members in the community. So it's important that we enhance those partnerships, that we increase our wayfinding, we provide people the tools that they need in order to understand how to use the system, the education components, and then we make those links to Kingston Transit that allow people that alternative to support that mode. And then from an operations and maintenance standpoint, it's really an understanding that we're building a new piece of infrastructure that needs to be maintained in the right way. What are the standards that we need to employ? How would we integrate our public works department early in the design of that infrastructure so that it can be maintained in an efficient way? What is the priority of that maintenance? And how do those pieces like sweeping and snow clearance, pavement markings, signage, surface repairs, all of those pieces that factor into vehicular modes, how do you translate those onto the active transportation network? So in summary, the plan that has been presented, it contains the citywide spine. How will we connect to transit? What are the facilities that encourage walking, cycling, and rolling? How do we address the neighborhood level concerns through our transportation focus area work and customize it to allow those programs and initiatives to reflect what the local community and neighborhoods are looking for? The plan is intended to be flexible, it's intended to be dynamic, so that it can take input and accommodate new programs or technologies or changes within neighborhoods over time. And to ensure that the programs, the initiatives, and the operations and maintenance sort of go hand in hand with those pieces. From a next step standpoint, if the plan is adopted through council, we'd be looking at developing a short-term implementation and resourcing plan. So a 5-year plan that would outline what infrastructure can we build that's part of this citywide network. Where would we focus our studies for the neighborhood level work with the transportation focus areas and those recommendations, and what programs and initiatives would make sense to begin this so that we can foster awareness and use of our AT network. The intention is, if the plan is adopted, to then look at developing this implementation plan with engagement with our community and stakeholders, and returning to council in Q4 prior to budget deliberations, so that this can be included in the future. That's that. So any questions or discussions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Semple. That's excellent. I was going to propose that we move and second the recommendation, and then we can ask our questions, and we'll have unlimited committee time at that point. Otherwise, we'll be limited to 2 questions. So, mover, Councillor Hutchison, second by Councillor Holland. So we're not going to vote on it yet. So now it's just on the floor. So we would go to first step would be questions from members of the committee. Is that right? Yeah, so questions from members of the committee about the report. Yes, Councillor Hutchison, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, let me say that it's so comprehensive, it's difficult to sort of get a grip on it. And you look at the neighborhoods and you see all these dotted lines, right? And would it be correct, I believe you said this, I'm just making sure, you decided on these dotted line trails by consulting people who cycle in the neighborhoods and so on. Is that correct? Like they're just not something, that looks like a good place to put it.
Through you, Mr. Chair, you're referencing the neighborhood level routes, the dashed red lines?
Yes, I'm looking at the cycling network on map 3B.
Okay, yeah. So the way that those routes were built out were built out through some technical analysis, certainly working with an understanding of the connectivity and the pieces that would make sense. But that was also subject to some review by our advisory group and our community stakeholders. but also public consultation and engagement as well. So all of these routes and maps were presented to the public through information, open houses, through online information, but also through pop-up workshops and other forums that they were involved in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Personally, I think the success of alternative transportation, including transit, as well as active transportation, is whether people use it for employment, commuting. And I'm just wondering if you've done any, or you did some preliminary evaluation of the routes that would be used and how long people can be expected to, say, bike to work, walk to work, bike to work, and that. So I'm wondering what some of the analysis is behind the issue of commuting.
Yeah, so I think that, yes, that analysis was completed. I think we, from a standpoint of understanding sort of where people live and then where people are working, it certainly a consideration was given to how can we provide them a continuous facility and network such they can get there. I'll let our consultant, Mr. McLaughlin and Ms. Valente, speak to the details of the analysis that was done, but it included looking at employment density and commuting.
Yep, through the chair. So we did look at Stats Canada data. We looked at the employment centers throughout Kingston. We overlaid that with where people live, where the density is. So we did that actually before we even started looking at routes, trying to understand where people are, where the travel patterns are. Statistics Canada gives us pretty interesting information on journey to work trips. So we have an idea where people are traveling in Kingston now. So with that understanding, then we started overlaying it with the existing network you have, and started then looking at what, where's the missing density of networks? Where could we improve infrastructure to better connect where people are currently living and working? We were developing actually two systems. One was, as you asked, about people commuting to work. There's also another system, which is the recreational system. So there are actually two independent systems that we sort of married together in this master plan, realizing that some people may never choose to take their bike or walk to work, but are very interested in the recreational components and connectivity, and they both have different goals and objectives. So we followed two independent paths, developing the master plan, and then brought them together in the end to see how they connected.
I've only had this since. So I'm wondering how much overlap there is. I'm just wondering what the potential of the system as you build it out is. That's what I'm trying to get at. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I'm also sort of preparing an answer to the type of person that we met at POH who said the whole thing was stupid. Okay. And things were just fine. Now, I don't believe that. I don't think anybody here believes that. Mm-hmm. But you have to deal with that. Mm-hmm. So hopefully I'm getting clear enough about why I'm asking what the efficacy of the system will be and how does it work out? Like, what is the amount of overlap between the recreational and the commuting for employment, and how confident are we that this can work as we're physically built now, that sort of thing.
Through the chair, so that's a really great question, actually. We don't have all those answers. What we do know is that we've developed a network that we think best represents, based on experience elsewhere, the kind of routes and choices people will make to get to and from where they live and where they work. So from a recreational perspective, some people who will cycle for recreational purposes or utilitarian purposes to go to a corner store or visit friends may take parts of the commuter network if they're comfortable using that. And some parts of the commuter network are actually off-road or in boulevard trails, which sort of appeal to a broad range of users. Others are on-road, maybe in cycle tracks or buffer bike lanes. So a percentage of the population, including those who are more recreational focused perhaps, or may not be comfortable on a road if they're cycling, for example, will have other choices, because we did create those two systems. We try to connect the recreational system independently of the commuter system. and then we brought them together. And our real goal through this plan, and I think as everyone digs into it and as you start implementing it, you'll see that it's been designed to start to shift recreational users more into utilitarian trips, so they get more comfortable using more of the infrastructure as it gets built. And hopefully we can encourage through promotion and education and outreach to encourage some of them to start walking or cycling or connecting that trip with public transit to go to work or to go to a destination or to go to school. So it's been designed with that overlap in mind, and in part through the important education program and outreach program to, and that's a really key component. It's not all about infrastructure. We really need to inform people about the network as you build it and to educate people. Once they try it, they'll realize that there's a lot of benefits to using it. We just need to get them out to try it. That's part of the key.
I've got other questions. But
Yeah, we'll go around and come back to the second round. There's just a lot, it's a big subject. Next I saw Councillor Holland.
Thank you. Excuse me. I have one very straightforward one, which I'll start with. So this is to do with the various ways of describing, it's not so much the networks. I think it's more to do with cycling. So like the buffered path, for example, or then there's the off-road one. So you mentioned that there were certain barriers, including rail tracks, that are not exactly factored in here. So we don't actually see them. They're not really identified in these different types of facilities, right? Like we're not looking at bridges and spans with cyclists on them yet. So those projects, I sort of understood by the way that you referred to them, would be, if they were deemed essential to the network, they would be brought forward and there's probably an environmental assessment involved and all of that other work. So do you see the funding aspect of that as being like prohibitive in any way, or do you feel that with this plan that there's enough room, whether in the budget or with the sort of rationale in the network, to bring those forward in a fairly reasonable time frame? I'm speaking specifically of potential span over John Counter Boulevard for the KMP Trail, and I know that would be something that would need an EA, and it would take a long time. It would cost a lot of money. So, I'm just trying to see can those things be brought forward and moved forward relatively quickly if there is the will to support with whatever the investment needs to be that's not included in this plan?
Yes, so through Mr. Chair. So just to frame those 8 projects, those major barriers, of which the crossing over the CN rail line along JCB is one of those projects. And so to use that project as an example, it is more complex than looking at a buffered bike lane or a cycle track along a component of a right-of-way. And it involves study, and it likely involves an environmental assessment, as you alluded to. So the approach that you see in this, I think in these funds that are shown, is so if you see the line that sort of speaks to the capital costs for supportive AT infrastructure, within that roll-up is money that's capital that is there to complete those studies, to start that work on the initial feasibility of those pieces. What we were not able to do is include a capital estimate of what that project would likely cost, just given the unknowns around feasibility and land ownership and some access issues. Most of those 8 projects are shown as if you will, desire lines. So, and they're not fully costed for construction in here, but the studies to complete the initial phases of that work to understand the feasibility are. And I think you were just sort of speaking about the timing of that. So I think as part of the development of the implementation plan, sort of the next step of this, we would look at, what components make sense to be included in the short term, and would be engaging on that to understand which pieces of say those barrier projects, which ones make sense to come forward in the short term.
Sorry, before you ask your next question, just to clarify what you just said. So the 8 desired routes, like the reason they're in that category in the plan is because they require additional study before they can be deemed feasible. Is that correct?
Broadly, yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Broadly, yes. So they are existing connections, intersections, or crossings that do not exist versus upgrading existing intersections that are already there. So we wanted to differentiate between the addition of a new crossing or a new intersection along the citywide network versus something that is there and requires some redevelopment or upgrade.
Thank you. It's a very quick follow-up. So I'm not going to hold you to anything, but based on what you've just said, can I assume then that this is something that staff can continue to bring forward, even if there are extra costs, and that it will continue to be brought forward in a way that's sort of most practical, given what we're trying to accomplish with this? Or is it something that's going to need kind of constant sort of, we need this in the budget, we need it in strategic planning kind of discussions? Because the capital project is not included here, is it something that is, I'm not looking at timelines, but is it going to move forward? Like, let's say, for example, compared to the waterfront master plan, where there are some that are sort of far out because they're kind of less within our reach in terms of the budget. This is part of a network. Does that mean that it's going to move forward when it's most needed, based on staff's recommendation, or does it need sort of further budget kind of motions from council?
I'm wondering if a member over here might want to tackle that question, because it's like it's about the budget. Ms. Kennedy.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'll give it a try. The idea is that, and I think probably the best analogy was used in the Mr. Sample's presentation, is this is a blueprint. So it's a way of thinking, it's guiding, and it's going to guide sort of future work and future initiatives. So we'll be coming back with an implementation plan that will address the funding component, and it will address the priorities, not only just the priorities in the plan, but how they fit into other priorities with the city. So you'll see that come back, and I believe it's in Q4 that the implementation plan will be coming back. At the same time as we're doing that, we'll also be working on our next round of budgets, and so they will be incorporated into that. So we'll be looking at the priorities and then how those are funded.
Thank you. Councilor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For Bay Ridge Drive, for example, it's recommended on some parts of Bay Ridge Drive for an in-boulevard trail. And I know how narrow Bay Ridge Drive is. It has a ditch on either side, going past Taylor Kidd up to Princess Street and beyond. So to make a boulevard, an in-boulevard trail, is like looking at that diagram that you showed a couple of slides ago. Yeah, right there on the right-hand side. So would that be then filling in the ditch, like putting a pipe under the ditch, filling it in, and that's where you would get the room to do an in-boulevard trail?
Mr. Dixon.
Through you, your chair. In some circumstances, that's what it would take. In some cases, it could take combining a sidewalk together with that to create an in-boulevard trail, because it's used by both cyclists and pedestrians. So it would really depend on the location and the specific location where we would be. But yeah, in some circumstances, that would be required.
Great. Residents would look forward to getting rid and filling them in, and that's like a complaint I get a lot. So I had to look at map 3C and go to the Adobe document, the PDF, and zoom in to actually see what's being proposed. And I like what's being proposed. I thought at first, looking at just this map, I don't have any new sidewalks planned, right? But now I can see where the sidewalks are. But if there were any sidewalks in map 3C that are not being proposed, and I don't have any examples right now, how tied are we to those 5-year infrastructure plans? Like, would staff just say, sorry, we can't do that sidewalk because it wasn't identified in the active transportation plan? Or would we still be able to get a sidewalk in? Like, is this basically our plan for the next 20 years?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Again, Ms. Kennedy framed it right. This is a blueprint, provides a framework from where we would build our infrastructure. There are gaps and pieces that were identified that are included for the proposed sidewalks, but some of what you're speaking about is also covered by what we're talking about. How do we develop what is required at the neighborhood level? So, we've created the if you will, the citywide kind of pedestrian network that's shown on map 3C. But there still may be connections and pathways or changes at a neighborhood level that would be important and make sense for how AT would work within that community. And so there's so I guess to come back, no, the intention is not to say sort of, did you zoom in on map 3C and see that the sidewalk wasn't there? Well, you've missed your opportunity. I think the intent is that that we're creating a complete pedestrian and cycling network that would work through there. With that said, I mean, we also would, as Ms. Kennedy noted, be working within the constraints that exist for us from a capital standpoint, and the allocations that we would include for that from a 4 and 5 year time frame.
Great, thanks. Definitely, I don't see any sidewalks missing, but I do see some pedestrian crossings that I had in mind, in the next 4 years, if I get back in, that are not in there, because really the only pedestrian crossings we have shown on the maps are over the major streets, right? Like over Princess Street, and we have one over Taylor Kidd, over the hydro corridors, Midland Avenue, and probably across the entire city there's room for other pedestrian crossings now that they're legalized and whatnot. My other thing that I saw was the proposed pedestrian crossing over the railway track, probably over Tanner Drive, right? I think it's like, I can't remember, is it Farnham? Something like that. It's Easter Gardeners Road. And I just think that even though it might be needed because people are going over the railway tracks to get to the RioCan Center to go shopping, that comes with a whole host of other problems, the entire train whistle issue that I know so well over the last 12 years. Like, it's just going, I hope there would be, like it says, $300,000. We probably can't even afford it, but it would just open up so many other issues, even though it would give people a safe crossing. There's so many issues to keep in mind, because that would just bring up the entire train whistle debate, which right now is pegged at $1.2 million if we have to fence off the entire corridor. So I just wanted to point that out since it's in the plan. And yeah, I think that covers it. Thanks.
Okay, so that's taken from staff, I guess, as an important comment to keep note of. Just on that point, is that one of the 8 desired crossings that you were talking about earlier?
Through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I think so. That's referencing one of the 8 crossings, and I think to sort of clarify Councillor Osanik's point, yes, the intention was to identify sort of these major barriers from a citywide network and a connectivity piece that we can create. There certainly is a recognition that there are neighborhood level crossings and that are not represented on the map, just that may be important at a neighborhood level, but don't necessarily factor into the citywide network.
Okay, so we're going to have a second round, but I have a couple of questions myself. So, so keep in mind that this is a blueprint and it's sort of an overview, and the analysis has been done. Tonight we're voting on the recommendation to recommend that council implement the plan, and then it needs to sort of be fleshed out as we go, both on the neighborhood level, as you said, but also on the capital expenditure level. It's like, what are things going to cost, and what's the priority of them, and so on. So all of that, basically the first timeline for that, where council would see something, would be Q4 2018 for the implementation plan. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the intention.
Yeah. And then how often can we expect sort of further plans, or do we not know that yet? Would it be on a yearly basis that we would sort of be looking at what needs to go in the budget to further implement the plan? And I know it's a 20-year plan, and it goes in 5-year segments, right? So is it every 5 years that we would do a new implementation plan, similar to like an update to the official plan, or is it more often than that?
Through you, Mr. Chair. I mean, I think some of those details, I think, to be determined. Certainly, in the context of looking at some of the major projects, projects that would be done in conjunction with road reconstruction or utilities work, that would typically be contained within the city's 4-year capital plan. But there may be other opportunities for single and one-off projects that would come in a different manner. But I think the intention would be that they're contained within a 4- and 5-year planning horizon that would allow sort of the execution of that infrastructure over that time frame. We are looking at it from the standpoint of there's certainly that infrastructure plan, but we think about it in the standpoint of from the standpoint of the context of like the Kingston Transit operating plan, which provides a 5-year operating horizon. It provides some guidance on the routes and service levels and pieces that would go in, but there are changes and opportunities to influence that throughout the course.
That's a great analogy. Thank you. Okay, I have 2 specific questions. The first one, because it came up when Councilor Sanders was asking about the boulevard. So we've got it up there still, the In Boulevard Trail. So I see on this map 3B, there's an existing In Boulevard Trail in Woodhaven. I saw it yesterday because I happened to be in the neighborhood. I'd never been to Woodhaven before. And the first thing I noticed was this really wide sidewalk on the right-hand side driving into Woodhaven from Bay Ridge Drive. And I know it's a new subdivision, and I'm wondering, why is it that it already has an In Boulevard Trail? Maybe that's an engineering question, and why is it that that's the only place in Kingston that has an existing In Boulevard Trail?
So I think you're referencing out in Woodhaven on Catwoods Drive, the Cataraqui Woods Drive section. So I think, and meaning that is the only location that has an existing In Boulevard Trail?
Only one that I can see on map 3B. Maybe there are others, but I mean the KMP is clearly marked on here, but that's something else. That's an
off-road trail.
An off-road trail, right? So. Am I wrong about that being the only one? Oh, there's one over in Pittsburgh as well, actually.
Do you mean meaning that that's the only existing one, or that's because there are a number of
existing?
Proposed.
Yes, existing.
Yes. Yeah, there are some other smaller segments that you may not see, I guess, really over on King Street near St. Lawrence College.
Okay, I know that one. Yeah.
Segment through there, okay. But it may not meet the.
It's not a blue line on map 3B, but I know the one you mean. So that's like an old bike lane that is now an In Boulevard section, I guess you could say, in front of Lake Ontario Park.
Yeah, there's a section on Centennial that's been built out as well, just north of Catwoods Drive.
Oh yeah, that's true too. Yeah, that is on the map.
But yes, I mean, I think through you, Mr. Chair, I think that sort of speaks to some of the types of infrastructure that the city has been building from an active transportation standpoint over, say, the last 15 years have largely been on-road facilities in providing either a share or a painted bike lane. Certainly, the thrust of the citywide network recommendations that are being proposed do move those broader citywide connections to a higher order facility. In cases where it's possible onto an in-boulevard trail or off-road, or onto a higher order facility like a cycle track. A project that is an in-boulevard trail or an important east-west connection that has the potential to develop is along the Front Road corridor, Front Road and King Street. We're investigating, is an in-boulevard trail there possible, and can we create that east-west connection that takes us from the Redendale neighborhood and potentially beyond up to Bay Ridge, and then create a consistent in-boulevard trail until at least Portsmouth Avenue, where we can transition you to a bike lane to Queen's University. So it's that type of network that we're trying to create in the long term, in creating a consistent facility over a large piece of the across multiple neighborhoods, versus smaller one-off segments that have been created in the past.
Right. That's what you're kind of saying, is there are sort of pieces of the puzzle that already existed, such as the one in Woodhaven, which is more recent, and the one in front of St. Lawrence, which is a little bit older. And the plan tries to make it citywide by connecting those existing pieces of the puzzle. Because we didn't have a plan before, we still had maybe some impetus to create some of that infrastructure, but we didn't have a plan. So now that's what this does, is it connects it all together using the existing pieces that we might already have, and telling us what we need to do to fill in the gaps. Is that sort of how it goes?
Yes, through you, Mr. Chair. So I think, certainly, I think previously, some of these segments were largely created at the time where where the city was doing road reconstruction. So there was an opportunity to put that segment in. But I think the intention is we would continue to do that, obviously, if there's an opportunity to have a multi-department sort of road reconstruction to put the correct cycling facility in. But the plan also certainly envisions moving towards how can we also develop AT projects to complete those connections, separate from a multi-department project. Yeah.
So that's the gist of my question. So it's sort of like Councillor Hutchins, like I'm asking a piece of the question, but I'm really asking is a bigger question. So basically, if this plan gets implemented, and there are details still to be ironed out, but potentially, would that obligate engineering to consider active transportation in all of their new construction? Like was done in Woodhaven, which was obviously a clairvoyant move to put the in-boulevard there, because it was done so recently that obviously someone knew something was coming, right? But that was an option. That was done sort of as sort of a smart move, but it wasn't actually council's direction that made that happen. What I'm asking is, does this plan get us closer to that council direction, or similar to Councillor Holland's question, is it something that we need to talk about in strategic planning if we want to see it affect all departments in this sense? Like what I know the ATMP informs it's underneath in the layers under the official plan, and it's under the transportation master plan. But we're building roads already based on our current plans, must be because of the official plan and the transportation master plan that we have. Does this basically, is the effect of the ATMP that it changes the transportation master plan, or is the effect of the ATMP that it changes the official plan, or is it informing upwards? I'm just having a hard time seeing exactly where the rubber meets the road, to use the pun. Yes.
Through you, Mr. Chair. ATMP is aligned to the official plan and the policy statements within that indicate the desire for a new direction from several years ago. I think your question is more geared to, does this give us a blueprint so that we do a better job of looking at the road projects, and that's we used to look at them as road projects. And now can we look at projects within the right-of-way and see how we can design those to incorporate the modes, the active modes and the transit modes and all of those pieces that come together. And I think the answer is yes. But again, it's never like one solution. Usually there's multiple strategies. So the internal reorganization that we did at the beginning of March, which formed two groups basically within the Transportation and Infrastructure Services area. And so one of those groups is our engineering department, clearly, and they're managing major projects. But the rest of that the rest of that department is called operations. And that's where we now have transportation planning, where we are doing the EAs, we're doing these types of plans for transportation. And within that group, we also are working with our partners, Kingston Transit, because they're operating on our new road designs, our Public Works Department, who is maintaining our new road designs, our Parking Department, who is managing a piece of that right-of-way. So I think it's all coming together. It's taken a while, and Kingston is not the first community that's taken a while to sort of shift their thinking a little bit in terms of how do you make the best use of that transportation? And it's not all about roads and cars. And I think we've made some positive steps, but I think this blueprint will certainly allow us to do a much better job. And I think it certainly sets the stage to getting us to the vision that Council set out when it said, we want 20% active transportation. We want 15% transit. So much like transit, you have to start somewhere, and I think this is an excellent start. And I think that as we go and as we see the first 5-year plan and what's in it, and and we move to implement, I think it's going to get us where we need to be.
To your last point, I think I tend to agree. The question that we as councillors always struggle with is sometimes we see something that looks great, but I personally have a hard time sometimes seeing point A to point B. And so historically, we've had a transportation approach which was 100% about cars and roads. And then we added, and a little bit of transit. And then we focused on transit, and then the roads had to accommodate the transit, and that automatically, you can't do one without the other, so we were doing both. And now we're adding this piece because the cycling mode share is only at 2%. And it is absolutely because of the lack of infrastructure that it's at 2%. That's the primary reason. Safety, everything comes back to the same point. I'm a cyclist. I know exactly how it works. The safer people are, the more people cycle. And to the point about kids getting driven to school, it's because the parents don't feel that it's safe to let them walk or cycle to school. And that's actually the case with my own children right now. So, so yes, we're all on the same. We're all pushing for the same thing, but we need to acknowledge at this point that we're about to vote on this recommendation that historically, the thinking in all the cities was that roads were for cars, and we've acknowledged that, and now. We, as council, will need, I guess the answer is we will need to have these discussions at strategic planning because we see how complex it is, and because even though we have an active transportation master plan, we're only just beginning the push to start sharing the road and the right-of-way, and to get it back to sort of what's the best practice for all citizens. So I guess with that, I would just, I don't know, it's a Pandora's box and a great thing at the same time. So I guess we gotta sort of, I don't know, go to the second round of questioning, because I know Councillor Hutchison had more things to say. So maybe we can get some focus back after that ramble. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think the line of questions over here, we're all good. Just a couple of questions, just to be sure. When you got the 85 million for capital, that's additional to any roads we might be doing, right? Like if we want to have bike lanes, is that what that number is saying? Like if you want bike lanes or you want in boulevard lanes, this is what you gotta pony up, right? In addition to getting the road fixed.
So through
Right?
Mr. Chair, yeah, so the costs that are shown here are for the AT facility, and it's based on a unit cost per distance. So to add the facilities that we've proposed that are shown on the maps 3A, B, and C, in the long term across the entirety of that network, it is for the AT specific components. It's not for the roads themselves.
That's what I thought, I just wanted to be sure. So what we're talking about here over a 20-year span is about $6.5 million a year. 20 times
Just get
6.5.
my calculator out, but
I'm out by 3 million, but we're generally, you know, in the ballpark. In 20 years, it'll be 150 million anyway.
Yep.
Right? So the reason I say that is because if you want to sell this thing, right, and there may be some pushback for political reasons that happened last week, we're not saying to people, oh, we're going to plunk down $127 million to do this thing. No. We're going to do 5, 7, 6, you know, while we patch this thing together. Isn't that a better way to think about it?
Through Mr. Chair, so the intent here was certainly we wanted to be clear with council the magnitude of what was put here, but certainly it's a long-term plan that would be executed within the constraints that are available to us, and within the resourcing that we have to execute that work. So in $5 or $6 million chunks, I guess.
I was waiting for you to say the.
I don't think I did, but I.
No, you didn't, but you got pretty darn close. Let me see. Okay, so it's only in the implementation plan. This is what I got from what Ms. Kennedy said and part what Ms. Kidd said, is the implementation plan will show us more about how you're going to prioritize these things, how you're going to fit the various priorities together. Say you want commuting to be able to be facilitated, but there's a recreational thing, and we were going to do this road anyway, or nearby, and all those things that I've watched over the last so many years about how staff think about how we're going to implement this thing in the, not on the cheap, but in the cheapest way, or least expensive way is a better way to put it, that's possible. So, like, the proof will be in the pudding come Q4. Now, so I want to answer that. So, but the other thing is, we got an election coming up. If this comes in Q4, will we be just voting on the principle of this plan? Like, this is what you can do, are you in favor? But we're not going to be voting on specifics, like the implementation plan to do X and Y and Z streets. Or, because won't we be lame duck, like, pretty soon? So that's my two questions. They are connected, I believe.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So we were vaguely aware that there's an election coming.
Is it this year?
And we considered, how we would bring this forward, and it was really important for us to get here tonight because this timing is really critical for us. So the intent is to bring the implementation plan, And you walked this journey with us with Kingston Transit. You remember when we first came with Kingston Transit, and all we had was a couple of loops on a piece of paper and said, just hold on, we'll come back. You know, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So the implementation plan that we envision will have specific projects in it. From a lame duck perspective, there's an amount of money that council can approve, and we're not going to ask for that. We're going to say, here's the projects, and here's what these projects would cost over the next 4 to 5 year period. And if you're okay with that, because we've done all of our consultation and all of that work, direct us to incorporate that into the budget process, and it'll be through the budget process that it will ultimately get funded. So it'll be a pieced process. Here's the plan. Here's what we call the short-term plan. This is what it is. This is what it's going to cost. And then we would incorporate that into our budgets, and it'll all be considered at budget time. And just in terms of the details of that, and I mean, if we had more time, we would have brought that piece forward this evening, but we just didn't have time by the time the master plan was done. I say we a lot. I actually didn't have much to do with this. It's all this team. But the work internally, because we work very closely with our engineering group. We're working closely with Utilities Kingston because Utilities Kingston does work, and we want to be able to align to the work that they're doing as well. So, and we have to be considerate of the budget because we don't have $127 million today. We know that we need to put this in over time and in a responsible way.
Well, thank you for that. I think that just as a small comment, no, I'll just go on to my last question. So you've been working with this for like months, right? And there's a ton of work here, actually, right? So, well, maybe not a ton, but 1,900 pounds, okay? So, this is my general question, because I know you would have been evaluating this as you went along, and you would have a feel for this, or anyone who wants to answer this. What's the greatest strength of this blueprint? And then, of course, I'm going to ask you, what's the greatest weakness? Because I can look at this and say, well, we're never going to get there, right? Maybe that's the greatest weakness. I don't know. But just, I'm trying to get an overall airplane view of what this is going to do, and so I can describe to people, you know, why it's not stupid, okay? I don't have that problem so much in my district, but in other districts, it's an issue, okay? It's a citywide issue. It's more than a citywide issue. So, I mean, just what's the greatest strength? What's the greatest weakness? And just, you know.
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, effort that we put in.
Through the chair, thank you for your question, Councillor. I mean, there is a great deal of work that's gone into the plan. I mean, asking what the best part of it is, like asking what your favorite kid is. You know, in thinking about that, you allude to the complexity of the plan and how we explain that to residents or the general public around it. I think one of the greatest piece of this is in trying to create that hierarchy so that we can speak to both what are we trying to create from a citywide standpoint over the longer term, and showing a consistency in what we are going to build with that, but also allowing for those pieces that we can build within the neighborhood. Because I think a citywide network is a very abstract concept to most people, but I also know that from our interactions with the public and what we hear every day coming into the city, that it's also about, it is largely about what is happening on my street, you know, what's going on with my sidewalks and where I can cross. And there is a mechanism within this plan that looks to look at that more holistically. So moving away from a one-off and a one mode, if you will, kind of review of each of these problems that come in, and instead look at it in a more holistic way. So how can we, through the transportation focus area piece, look at what is happening in your neighborhood from a transportation standpoint as a whole, rather than just speaking to you about parking regulations or speaking to you about traffic calming. So I think that's a strength of it, and we're looking to build this citywide network, but we also are providing a mechanism that I think better addresses how people want to understand the transportation issues in their neighborhood. I think one of the weaknesses with the plan is that there will be a desire for that, especially at the neighborhood level, to happen quickly. And that is a process that will take some time and may be built into other parameters. So I think it will be, the weakness will be in trying to keep that momentum to foresee some of how that work will play out. An example of that right now is, the North Kingstown secondary plan that's underway. We're starting a transportation plan for that planning area, for that secondary plan. That's really providing the framework for the type of work that we want to do with these focus area pieces. And it will be as much about creating the meaningful pieces for the neighborhood from a holistic transportation standpoint, as it will be about managing the expectations about how quickly those can be executed and put in place.
That was darn, thanks.
Oh, Mr. Keach, we were wondering when you were going to clarify things for us. Go ahead.
So I thought I would comment to the question about the lame duck council, no, I'm joking. So I don't want to take anything away from Ian's answer, because I think he answered it excellent. But I want to talk a little bit about what I think is the biggest asset you have here, and I think it's the fact that you've got a plan. I think one of the things that we have shown that we can do very well here in the city of Kingston is plan, build infrastructure. I think we've done a great job over the last number of years. I think the work that we do on the multi-year plans and whatnot puts us way above most communities in the province and in the country. So if I go back to some of the questions that you ask about why do we have a little bit of a trail like this here, a little bit of a trail like that there, we've actually, and I'm speaking kind of on behalf of the engineering group now, and as Sheila said, there has been a transfer. I think there were some of these things that we were trying to do back for some time to fit it in when we were doing road work. I think now we've got a plan, we've got a blueprint that we can look to, and it will help coordinate the whole system. And as Sheila said, you've got the underground infrastructure, you've got the roads network, and you've got this, that's just another component to it. So I think it's just one more key part of the planning process, and I think that's your biggest asset. I think as far as the weakness goes, and I don't profess to be an expert in this at all, but I would kind of almost go to what the biggest asset is and say that down the road, you may look back at that was maybe a bit of a weakness, because I think one of the things that we have shown is that as we plan and build, we evolve and get better. And I think we have done an excellent job on Princess Street from the waterfront up to Division Street. But if you could go back and start over again, we would do things a little bit different. And I think you'll probably see the same thing with this. And although I think part of the planning process is your ability to change, you're going to look back at it sometime and say, damn, why didn't we think of that and do it this way? And that may be your weakness at that point. But I think this is just a great tool to have on a go-forward basis. We're already utilizing some of this as we put together your next 4-year plan that will come to council come to council January or February of next year.
That's great. Councillor Holland, you got another one? Go ahead.
This one question, which, so, okay, I'm a fast talker. So I'm thinking about the partnerships and the leadership aspect of this, kind of going again a little high level here. When one of your colleagues, the great Jeremy DaCosta, was describing mode share in terms of transit use, I remember him talking about changing behaviors and having to provide alternatives as the way forward. And so we've seen that a bit with the transit passes, et cetera. And so these forms become more desirable. it also, I guess from a health promotion perspective, changing behavior also involves understanding where people are and what some of the barriers are and how to facilitate their use of, as I've been describing, I guess, active transportation for school, for an example. So this brings me to my question, which is really about partnerships. I know that we have within this action plan, there's an emphasis on bringing things forward and working together and collaboration, education, and all those areas. So, okay, before I get to the question, further speaking, there are a few examples. We've just got back from Halifax, where we did a tour of some of the facilities there. There's the Halifax Oval is the former skating rink, Canada Games skating rink, which is now being used as a track essentially for inline skating, cycling, really, really heavily used by young kids who are out there learning how to use their bikes because it's just a big track. And they have on-site, they have equipment rental, all of it is free. They have helmets, they have skateboards, things like that. I know recently we did something kind of similar here in Kingston by trying to keep open up the streets. Kingston Gets Active did this pilot project where they opened up streets, and one of the things that was most striking about that, by open them I mean close them to traffic and allowed people to use them. What was most striking was that there were so many young kids who were just cycling, like learning to bike, because they were able to do it on that straight stretch and they really enjoyed it. So these are obviously examples of ways that we can facilitate sort of the education component, learning how to cycle and all of that. But I'm wondering, like, who takes the leadership role here? We have a lot of partners, and they're all doing really great work, but I do get the sense, and it's a bit of a frustration, that many of them are waiting for someone to come along and say, good idea, or we will do all that work and make it all happen, or something like that, because there are so many people doing this great work, and I don't know how it feeds into this. So are we saying with this action plan that we are taking the responsibility and the leadership role in making people become more literate when it comes to other forms of transportation, and that we will facilitate and work with partners to make that happen? I know that's not really part of what we need to approve tonight, but I'm just really curious because it seems to be lacking right now.
Maybe I'll speak at some of those pieces, and then maybe I'll ask our consultant to talk about some of the best practices from other communities and how that's been handled. To your point about whether the city is then looking to take a leadership role on sort of that suite of programs and pieces, I think we will better understand that as we develop the implementation plan and look at the resourcing and some of the early programs that make sense for us to help move some of these things forward. I think there are likely some components of those programs where the city would take a leadership role on. There are other programs and other components, especially within the schools and within sort of the schools and their linkages to community associations, where I think it would be appropriate for the city to be supportive and potentially helping from an organizing standpoint. But there really are a lot of resources that exist out there that are looking to discuss and be a part of that. Mr. Keach spoke to, the way that we've been building infrastructure, right, and trying to build those components and taking advantage of those opportunities. I think the same can be said for some of the programming pieces that we've done. Some good intentions in initiatives and pieces that have begun, but a need to then follow through and continue that work at a programming level. So I don't know, Mr. McLaughlin, if you can speak to that.
That's a great answer, actually. Maybe I'll just add, we've had the opportunity to do many plans for municipalities across Canada. And on the programming side, one of the things we've discovered that the municipality really needs to be the coordinator, the lead. They may not be involved in the delivery of all the various opportunities, and it was already noted that there are other organizations or partners who are better able to deliver certain programs, but they're not usually in a great position to do the coordination. And you have a plan that has a sort of a coordinated strategy to bring the partners together and to work with them, but someone does need to do the coordination. There is a recommendation in the plan, recommendation number 17, that actually is suggesting that the city should be the champion, and that should take on that coordination role.
Great. Last call? All right. So keep in mind, this is an ongoing process. We have a recommendation. It's been moved and seconded. I'll read it now. So that the Environment, Infrastructure, and Transportation Policies Committee recommend that A, Council endorse in principle the Walk and Roll Kingston Active Transportation Master Plan as presented in Exhibit B of Report Number 18-007, and B, Council direct staff to develop a 5-year implementation and resourcing plan consistent with the Walk and Roll Kingston Active Transportation Master Plan, and include identified projects in future capital and operating budgets for consideration. And C, Council direct staff to explore strategies to build the long-term financial capacity required to support the ATMP, including grant opportunities and an extension of the 1% incremental capital levy. That's the recommendation. It's been moved and seconded. We've asked our questions. Does anyone want to make a comment before we vote? Okay, then I will call the vote on the recommendation. All those in favor? And that passes unanimously. That's business 7A. Great. Just like that. Thank you for that illegal clap. 7B. Report received from the Kingston Environmental Advisory Forum. It's on the same topic. To the Chair and members of the Environmental Infrastructure Transportation Policies Committee, the Kingston Environmental Advisory Forum reports and recommends as follows from the Keefe meeting held on May 14th, 2018. We need to move and second, okay? So we need a move and seconder to receive the report. Moved by Councillor Holland, seconded by Councillor Senek. So basically, that the Kingston Environmental Advisory Forum recommends council endorsement of the Active Transportation Master Plan. That's the recommendation from Keefe, and that's what the report contains. Is there any comment? Seeing none, we will vote on the recommendation. All those in favor? And that also passes unanimously. Thank you, Keefe. There are no notices of motion, no other business. Is there any correspondence? There's no correspondence. And this special meeting is about to be adjourned. Our next regular meeting is just after Canada Day on July 3rd, on the regular Tuesday time, except it's the first Tuesday of the month, so make sure you mark that on your calendar. It's the first Tuesday, because council gets moved, right? And I guess that's about 3 weeks away. Okay, I'm looking for a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Holland. All those in favor? This meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.